Okay, so this is Sunday morning. Now, normally the convenience of this tank system would imply that I could use my kitchen or whatever, but because today we're having a get-together, my wife is busy cooking and stuff, so I'm going to do my developing out here in the garage-based workshop, and so I'm getting my developer stop bath and fixer set. Now, what you need to know is you have to have the data sheet for the film that you're using, and so I have some HC110 film developer that the syrup I've poured into brown bottles, glass bottles, in order to keep it preserved. It has a pretty long shelf life as it is, but so this data sheet for the Arista film with Kodak HC110, they happen to list a dilution of 1:31, but they don't give you a time, a development time. And this leads me to believe that this Arista 200 speed film is probably Kodak Tri-X, a variation on it, because when Kodak came out with their new formulation of Tri-X a few years ago, made in the, I think it was the Chinese factory, there was a problem where with developers like HC110 in standard 1:31 dilutions, it was too short of a development time to list. So it looks like I really don't have any other. I have some rotenol maybe, and they're saying 1:25 is 5 minutes. So I'm going to actually end up having to wing just to use a default development time. I'm just going to guess, or maybe I'll go on the internet and look for in the massive development chart and see if they list a real development time for this developer film combination. But be aware that you may not always have the developer dilution listed on your data sheet, so you might have to do some tests. The purpose of today's video is not really to do film tests, it's really to do a test of this tank. So I've gone to the massive development chart on the internet, and I've looked up Arista Ultra HD 200 speed film, Kodak HC110, and 4x5 sheet film, and they're saying 3.5 minutes developing time for sheet film, 3.5 minutes, using a dilution of 1+31 from concentrate. So that means I'm not starting from a stock solution. I'm actually using the syrup right here, 1+31 from syrup, 3.5 minutes. So it sounds like a fairly short developing time. We'll see what happens. So now, when you're reading film developer instructions and it says something like 1+31, what that means is 1 part developer with 31 parts of water. And what it means is there's a total of 32 parts. So I'm using a volume of 500 milliliters. Remember, the tank has a minimal volume recommended of 475, so I'm going to use 500. So I'm going to take 500 and divide it, not in 31, but I'm going to divide by 32 parts. And it comes out to be about 15.5 milliliters, 15.625 to be exact. And so 15.625 milliliters of concentrate and the rest water to make up 500 milliliters. We're going to get the temperature of our chemistry to 68 Fahrenheit, 20 degrees C, and do the 3.5 minute developing, about maybe 30 seconds to a minute stop bath, and 5 minutes on the fixer. Well, I have my processing tank ready to go. I have my developer, HC110, stop bath, fixer. The fixer looks a little old, like cloudy with some particulates, so hopefully that'll work. So on this developing tank, we have to remove the vent cap and then pour the chemistry in through the fill drain side. And I'll start the timer going when I start to pour, 3.5 minutes, and we'll see how it goes. Alrighty. Vent, fill, and we'll start this going. Okay, put on the caps, and I'm going to do some inversions. 1000 to 1000. A little bit of leakage out of the lid. So that was 30 seconds. So the lid does have a little bit of leaks. So according to what the instructions said, you want to squeeze the tank and then tighten the lid. And maybe that'll keep it from leaking. So when we get on to about 50 or 55 seconds, I'm going to start the next inversion. 5. That looks like it worked better. I didn't have any leaks that time. Wrap this tank on hard so that I can dislodge any air bubbles. Again, this is highly experimental, just to test a series of images, just to test out the tank. If I don't get good results picture-wise, well, no great loss. It's really about testing out how the tank works. So here's another 30-second inversion. We'll do 2 of them. A little bit of drippage that time. The base on this tank is quite small, and it's kind of top-heavy. It wants to kind of not, it's hard for it to sit upright. So you got to be aware of that. Another 30 seconds. I'm going to just invert it 1 time each way. So we're at 2 minutes right now. I got some developer on my hands, as usually happens. We're at 2:30 now. Yeah, it's a good idea to have a little tray like this just to catch the droppings, especially when you're processing it someplace like this that you normally wouldn't want to get wet. Okay, 2 more inversions. Yeah, it looks like if you squeeze the tank and then tighten the fill drain cap, you don't have as much problem with leakage, and that's what the instructions indicated to do. I'm going to do an inversion here at the very end. We're at 320. Okay, I'm going to loosen the vent cap and pour out my developer. And pour in my stop bath. Now the size of the spout is a little small, and what I'm doing with these plastic drink cups is I'm kind of squeezing them so that they're a little bit more like a nozzle. So I'm going to go to 4 minutes and 30 seconds on my timer. Stop bath, all you're doing is changing the pH from a base to an acid to stop the development process. There is a little bit of drippage, and it appears to be coming from the O-ring seal around the body, around the lid area. So just be aware that you probably want to wear some gloves when you're doing this. Not that stop bath isn't all that toxic, it's just basically vinegar. But okay, now my old fixer of questionable value. Now, sheet film supposedly has more silver in it than paper, and you want to agitate, or you want to have a longer fixing time than for paper. Paper usually 2 minutes is fine, so they recommend 5 minutes. So I'm going to go squeeze the tank. I got maybe a little bit too much volume in here, but we'll see what happens here. So we're going to be going about 10 minutes on the timer. So I'm going to stop the camera rolling and finish my fixing here off camera, because the rest of this is going to be rather boring, if it has not already been boring. So we're getting on 4.5 minutes of fixing. Now I'll mention that the lid has not leaked at all since I've been using the fixer. And I know that developer, because it's a base, tends to feel slimy in your hand, so it probably has less surface tension. So the fixer being acidic, it doesn't have that same problem, doesn't leak as much. So that's an interesting observation. So I'm going to open up the vent here and take off the cap for the fill drain and pour out my fixer. And let's see what we have. Let's see how this came out. Wow. That looks like a picture of Joe. That might have actually worked. I'm going to have to rinse these, dry them. Maybe we can look at them under a light table. Okay, now the instructions for the tank indicate for rinsing, you can just take off both caps and rinse it through the fill spout. And as you can see, it will overflow the fill spout, but also flow back out through the drain or vent spout. So we're going to sit here and rinse it for 15 or 30 minutes, and then we'll do some photo flow and hang it up in the film drying cabinet. So overall, I was quite impressed with the way that this tank operated. As far as loading was pretty easy. Putting the sheets of film in the little slots in the film holders was really very similar to loading up a sheet film holder for a camera, so it was pretty easy. I thought the processing part worked quite well. I do believe it leaks a little bit with developer. The lid has a slight amount of, like, it's not perfectly flat. There's a slight gap. You want to make sure that it's fully seated, and the fill spout, you want to squeeze the tank and then tighten it, and that helps create a partial suction in the tank that keeps it from leaking when you're doing your agitation. But overall, it worked quite well. I do think the narrow base, it is a little bit top heavy at times. I could see where it could fall over if you're not careful. It would be nice to see a little bracket that it slips into, like a little stand that would make it a little bit more stable. The rinsing, I thought, was quite good. Being able to take both caps off and rinsing the water, rinsing the film in the tank, that worked quite well. And then after my half-hour rinse, I mixed up 500 milliliters of photo flow. So I put, the thing with photo flow, this is a surfactant that helps drain the water droplets off of the film without creating water spots when it dries. You have to follow the instructions, which is dilute it 1 to 200. So for 500 milliliters of water, you want to add 2.5 milliliters of photo flow, and you want to make sure you measure that precisely. If you get too little or too much, it doesn't really work that well. But I mixed up the 500 milliliters of photo flow in a separate cup, and then I poured it slowly in the spout while it was the film was in the holders, and it worked quite well. I didn't have any problems with sudsing or foaming. And I went straight from the photo flow to my drying tank, or my drying cabinet, where it dried for a couple hours. So overall, the processing wasn't bad. So we have two negatives, and you can't see those very well. Overall, I thought the uniformity of the processing was pretty good. Let me show you. So what I did is I laid down the negatives on a light box. I photographed it with a digital camera. I imported the negative, the digital images of the negatives into my iPad, and I used an app called FilterStorm to reverse, invert, and adjust the tones on the photograph. And from there, I uploaded it to my Flickr account. So this is one of the photographs. And of course, we got glare from my window. Okay, so the sharpness is quite good. Now, as far as the tank goes, I thought the uniformity of the processing was quite good, because I have almost a solid white background behind me for the white storage shed building, and I had very good uniformity on the borders and edges. So that was a good thing. I did notice, however, that on the negatives, the sides opposite the notch, on both negatives, there is some scratching marks about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of the picture, and I think it's caused by On the film holder, there are these tabs where the end of the film fits into here, and these tabs right here that hold the film scratch the film right near the edge. And I don't think it's a deal breaker, but you will have to crop a little bit to get rid of that. And it does appear that it scratches the emulsion off completely. So, but overall, I was quite impressed with the uniformity of the developing. And so I didn't see any problem with that. I think this is a pretty viable system overall. It only takes 16 ounces or 475 or so, 500 milliliters of chemistry. So compared to the Yankee tanks, it's more efficient. Compared to a rotary drum, it's probably overall less expensive. And one advantage to this tank system over a rotary drum is if you wished, you can do stand development, right? A highly dilute developer, let it stand without any agitation. Whereas with a rotary drum system, of course, you have to continuously agitate it. You don't have that option. So this does allow you to do stand development, which is important if you're into landscape photography under high contrast scenic light and you want to control the negatives contrast a little bit better. It's certainly more convenient than processing in trays in a darkroom situation like traditionally is done. So overall, I think with a few small problems, I think this is a pretty decent product. Now, I don't have the exact, I can't remember the exact price. These are about $80 or $90 in that range currently from Freestyle Photo. So yeah, it's more expensive obviously than a Yankee tank or a regular roll film tank that you might get. But being able to process 4 sheets of film at once with 16 ounces of chemistry is a pretty good deal. So that's my little mini review and mini experience with the Stearman Press SP-445. Oh, one other thing I was going to mention. These film holders are very fragile looking. Now on the Freestyle Photo website, they do sell extra film holders and extra O-rings for the lid. I'm not sure about the baffles, the plastic baffles. I can't remember if they sell those, but those parts are pretty thin plastic, so I would be careful with this device and not stress those thin plastic parts too much. I don't know how strong they are, how easy they would be to break. But that's my review of the Stearman Press SP-445. I think overall it's a pretty interesting product, and I think it's well worth your consideration if you want to do 4x5 black and white sheet film and you don't want to employ a full-blown darkroom. Well, this is Joe Van Cleve, and until next time, you guys have yourselves a great day.